For 5 centuries, the Balkans were the Ottoman Empire's European backbone: soldiers, grain, ports, and revenue that kept the state running. By 1913, nearly all of it was gone, but this was not one sudden defeat. How does a superpower lose an entire region without seeing it coming? The real fracture started centuries before the wars that finished it. This is the slow collapse of Ottoman Europe. At its height, the Ottoman Empire's European border stretched from the outskirts of Vienna to the shores of the Adriatic and Black Seas. The Balkans were more than territory. They were the empire's engine, a corridor of rivers, mountain passes, and fortified cities that fed Istanbul with grain, timber, copper, and tax revenue. The Morava-Vardar route connected the Danube to the Aegean, moving armies and harvests with speed no rival could match. Cities like Salonika and Belgrade became fiscal hubs, channeling millions of tons of wheat, livestock, and raw materials to the imperial heartland. By the late 1600s, more than a third of the empire's revenue came from these European provinces, outpacing even Anatolia in some years. But the illusion of permanence masked growing strain. When Ottoman armies failed to take Vienna in 1683, the shock rippled across the empire. The Treaty of Karlowitz in 1699 forced the sultans to surrender Hungary and key Danubian forts, cutting off vital customs points and exposing the Balkans to new threats. Suddenly, the empire's European backbone became a front line. Military supply routes grew longer and more vulnerable. Tax registers showed a shrinking pool of peasants and falling grain yields as war and plague swept the countryside. The end of expansion meant the spoils of conquest dried up. Now every lost province meant less revenue for the treasury, less food for the army, and fewer loyal soldiers to defend the borders. The Ottoman state, once fueled by endless victories, found itself stretched thin, trying to hold together a region that was no longer a source of strength, but a growing liability. The cracks were there, even if the empire's map still looked impressive. The question was no longer how far the Ottomans could go, but how long they could hold on. Sultan Selim III saw the warning signs early. By the late 1700s, the Ottoman army's old backbone, the Janissaries, had become more obstacle than asset. Their resistance to new tactics and weapons left the empire's military outpaced by European rivals. When Mahmud II finally abolished the Janissaries in 1826, it was less a leap forward than a desperate gamble. The so-called auspicious incident wiped out the corps in a day of bloodshed, but the new army that replaced them, the Nizam-i-Sadid, struggled to fill the gap. Training, discipline, and equipment lagged behind the standards set by Prussia or Russia. Military reforms cost a fortune, but the treasury was already drained by war and shrinking tax revenues. The Tanzimat decrees of 1839 and 1856 promised to modernize the empire from the ground up. On paper, these reforms were sweeping: equality before the law, regularized taxation, new courts, and uniform conscription. In practice, the central government's reach barely extended beyond the walls of Istanbul. Cash taxes were supposed to replace the old Timar land grants, but cadastral surveys in the Balkans moved slowly, and local notables, Ayan, kept control of collection. In places like Bosnia, Ayan families ran tax farms as personal fiefdoms, sending only a fraction of the proceeds to the capital. The port city of Salonika, once a major revenue engine, saw its customs income siphoned off by local elites and foreign creditors. The cost of reform outstripped the state's ability to enforce it. Provincial power holders adapted quickly, using new councils and ministries to legitimize their own authority. As the gap widened between imperial ambition and local reality, the empire's grip on the Balkans loosened. The facade of centralization masked a patchwork of semi-independent provinces, each more responsive to local interests than to Istanbul. This slow drift set the stage for new forms of unrest, no longer just administrative headaches, but the seeds of outright revolt. Rebellion in the Balkans began as a fight for survival. In 1804, after Ottoman Janissaries executed Serbian leaders in the slaughter of the Knezes, Karađorđe Petrović rallied villagers to resist. Within a year, insurgents controlled towns like Požarevac and Sabak, even threatening Nice. For the first time, an uprising forced the Ottomans to negotiate. The 1807 Treaty of Bucharest briefly granted Serbian autonomy. When those promises fell apart, fighting resumed. Even after defeat in 1813, the idea of organized resistance, led by local commanders united by identity, had taken hold. In 1815, Milos Obrenović sparked a second Serbian revolt from Kragujevac. The pattern was set. Attack Ottoman tax farms, seize weapons, rally the countryside, and demand concessions. By 1817, Serbia had secured self-government and its own militia, still under the Sultan's authority, but with real autonomy. The formula was clear: local leadership, mass mobilization, and the readiness to exploit Ottoman weakness. The Greek War of Independence in 1821 raised the stakes. Uprisings spread across the Peloponnese and central Greece, fueled by print culture and secret societies. The Ottomans struck back, but Greek fighters held mountain passes and used guerrilla tactics. The turning point came in 1827 at Navarino, when British, French, and Russian fleets destroyed the Ottoman Egyptian navy. Foreign intervention was now decisive. By 1830, Greece had won independence, proving that revolt, combined with outside support, could redraw borders. These victories became the blueprint for future revolts. Print shops, secret committees, and appeals to Europe became standard. The Ottoman Empire now faced a region where rebellion could spread by example, and each success made the next more likely. European diplomats did not need armies to weaken the Ottoman grip on the Balkans. They used contracts and credit instead. By the mid-1800s, the empire's finances were bound by a web of agreements known as the capitulations. These treaties gave foreign merchants and consuls sweeping legal and economic privileges, letting them bypass Ottoman courts and taxes. French, British, and Austrian banks flooded Istanbul with loans, and by the 1860s, the Ottoman state owed more than £8 million to European creditors. When the treasury defaulted in 1875, the empire's financial independence vanished almost overnight. The crisis began in Bosnia and Herzegovina, where heavy taxes and corrupt collectors pushed villagers to revolt. The unrest spread south, and by April 1876, Bulgaria exploded in open rebellion. Ottoman troops responded with mass reprisals, burned villages, public executions, and thousands killed. European journalists and diplomats documented the violence in detail. Newspapers across London, Paris, and St. Petersburg published harrowing reports, turning Ottoman actions into a moral scandal. The phrase Bulgarian atrocities became a rallying cry, fueling public outrage and diplomatic pressure. Unable to pay its foreign debts, the empire agreed to sweeping controls. In 1881, the Ottoman Public Debt Administration was established. European officials took direct control over customs, salt, tobacco, and railways, key sources of revenue, many rooted in the Balkans. The empire kept its flag, but lost control of its own purse strings. Diplomats and bankers now dictated policy from behind the scenes, boxing the Ottomans in both financially and politically. The combination of foreign financial control and international outrage over the April uprising set the stage for the next crisis. With the empire's sovereignty in question and its Balkan provinces in open revolt, the path to war was wide open. In October 1912, four unlikely allies, Serbia, Bulgaria, Greece, and Montenegro, launched a synchronized assault against the last Ottoman strongholds in Europe. The Balkan League's armies moved with a speed that caught Ottoman commanders off guard. Serbian troops surged south, pushing through Kosovo and into Macedonia. Bulgarian divisions smashed through the Thracian plain, while Greek forces swept up the Aegean coast, seizing key ports. Within weeks, the Ottoman front unraveled. Thessaloniki, the empire's prized port, fell to Greek forces on November 8th, just days before Bulgarian troops could arrive. Each victory triggered the next. Towns surrendered in rapid succession, and Ottoman garrisons retreated toward Istanbul. Commanders like Radomir Putnik and Ivan Fichev became household names across the Balkans, their successes broadcast in European newspapers. The collapse was not just military. It was psychological. For centuries, these lands had been Ottoman. Now the empire's European map was being erased almost overnight. Diplomats gathered in Bucharest in August 1913, their pens drawing new lines across the Balkans in a matter of days. The Treaty of Bucharest locked in the losses that armies had made real. Serbia expanded south into Kosovo and Macedonia, Greece secured Thessaloniki and much of the Aegean coast, and Romania claimed southern Dobruja. Bulgaria, once the rising star, lost nearly half its gains. For the Ottomans, the map shrank to a narrow triangle, just a sliver of eastern Thrace and the city of Istanbul itself. Gone were the great river valleys, the ports, the breadbaskets that once fueled an empire. What centuries of conquest had built was erased by a few signatures on parchment. The Balkans, once the Ottoman heartland, had become a patchwork of new states, each border a reminder of what the empire could no longer hold. Borders drawn in crisis outlast empires. Today, the Balkans remain a patchwork of nations shaped by those old fractures, proof that what looks unshakable can unravel piece by piece. In every power struggle, hidden fault lines matter most. The real collapse only becomes clear when it is too late.